Alright guys, so welcome to the very first module of this keynote training. So this training winds up being the most important one of the entire process. Later in the training we'll be dealing with how to structure your talk, how to draw your listeners in right away, and all of these other things, right? Well, the thing is that none of that is going to be nearly as effective without the work that's being done as a result of the training I'm about to give you. This winds up being the foundation of everything else. If you try to build a house without a foundation, the house falls apart. And so everything else will fall apart if this work isn't done. This work essentially amounts to you figuring out what the silver bullet or the secret sauce is for everything that you're going to talk about on that stage. We'll get into what that looks like, of course, and if you've seen any of my other trainings, you already have an idea of what it looks like. But the point is that the work here is going to be so potent, so integral to everything else that happens, that without it, that rush of people that show up at the end of your talks, like getting mobbed by people at the end because they're so moved by what you said, none of that's really going to happen unless because of a series of other extenuating circumstances, like you already happen to be super famous and they're going to mob you no matter what. But failing that, you're going to need to do this work right here in this training for that mobbing to happen. As you already see, this is a very long training. So I have a couple of tips for you as you go through it. One is to watch it in twice the speed or 1.5 times the speed or a faster speed than it actually is. This is how I like to do video training modules. I like to increase the speed because neither me nor anyone else is talking so fast that you couldn't still keep up when you advance the speed of it. So rather than being this great big long thing, you can get the information in a lot less time. And another thing I recommend is at various points in the second half of the training, I will provide you with exercises. Associated with this training is a worksheet that you can download. So what I recommend you do is you pause the training. When I give you instruction, you try to do it right then and there. The nice thing about these video training modules is you can control the speed with which you consume it. So you can speed it up just to go through the whole thing, and you can pause it when you need to do some of the work. All right? So let's get going. You're going to be giving a keynote talk. That's what the purpose of this training is, to help you to create. And if you're putting this out there, then you have an idea that you want to share with others. And that idea is essentially a solution to a problem. The whole purpose of this entire thing is for you to provide some sort of solution. People are going to listen to you talk because there's something in their world that they want to solve, and listening to you will in some way help them to solve it. Whether they know what it is or not, in theory, by the end of the talk, they are going to be empowered to do that. So a keynote or a talk of some sort is meant to provoke the audience into considering a different way of solving a problem. So if it's whether it's nutrition or it's marketing or business, whatever it is, they are solving the problem, or they think they need to solve a problem in a certain way, or they don't even have a solution to the problem at all. And you are going to provide them with a different way of looking at that problem. Essentially, you are meant to empower your audience. That is the goal of the talk. And in theory, if you empower them, if you give them so much juice that they now see this problem in a whole different way, they're going to be drawn to you. They're going to be attracted to everything else that you do, and that's what's going to make them mob you at the end. As of this training, I recently went to a conference, and it was one keynote speaker after another, which really meant they weren't keynotes at all. It was just a series of speakers who were meant to hold our attention for an hour at a time. And one after another, they made some sort of offer, like a high ticket kind of offer at the end. And in theory, they're supposed to finish the talk and people are going to mob their staff to sign up for whatever their offer was. And it happened once. I saw it happen to one guy the entire weekend. And frankly, that was just because he offered them the opportunity to pay whatever they wanted for the program. They could pay $100 and they would have had access. But everyone else who was looking to charge couple of $1,000 or however much it was weren't making any sales, and they weren't getting hoarded with questions or anything like that, because while people might have thought it was a good talk, they didn't feel empowered. With this particular training that you're going through right now, you are going to be infinitely better positioned to have them feel empowered, and I'll explain why in a moment. This is how we typically create talks. This is how most of the people created talks at that conference I just went to. They said they gave you 6 components or 7 components. This is what you do. Or you might explain what your methodology is, and this is what we do. This is what I do. Or if you're explaining a project, you might outline the different components of the steps you took. This is what we did. This is what people typically do when they go up and they speak on stage. There was even a really famous entrepreneur type person who was at this particular conference, and he's got a New York Times best-selling book and this and that, and he went up on stage, and that's exactly what he did. He just said, here are 6 things you need to do. So essentially what all of these speakers, what most speakers in most contexts do, is they provide information. Most public speakers think it's their job to provide as much information as possible. They think it's their job to share knowledge, that knowledge is going to be the thing that empowers others, that knowledge is power. But this is just not true. People do not show up at a conference or come to some sort of talk being given somewhere to get information. They might think that that's why they're there. So, oh, I'm just going to go and listen and maybe I'll get some good information. They might actually think that. But what do you do with information? You either know it or you don't. But information itself, in and of itself, isn't of intrinsic value. What information can potentially do is empower somebody to do something that they previously couldn't do. But what that means is that people do not show up at a talk or a keynote speech or at a conference to get information. They show up because they want to solve their problem. And maybe the information is going to be a vehicle for solving that problem, but it's not ultimately what they want. So what is it that ultimately does empower somebody in the audience? If it's not information, what is it that we can do with our keynote speech or other sort of public speaking opportunity to empower others? So to answer this question, when I'm teaching this in the live workshop, what I'll do is I will hold up this beanbag, and I'll hold it up just like you see in this picture here, about 3 or 4 feet above the ground, and I'll ask them, okay guys, what will happen when I let go of this beanbag? And they'll kind of look at me in a confused way. And one person will just kind of tentatively say, it will fall to the ground. Still not sure why I'm asking them this question. And I say, it'll fall to the ground. Are you sure? And they'll say, yeah. And then I'll ask somebody else at the workshop, are you sure? Do you agree that that's going to be what happens? And they're like, yeah. And then they think that I'm like crazy or something like that. And I'm like, all right, I don't know. That seems like a bit of a leap, but all right, well, let's see what happens. And then you guys all think it's going to fall to the ground. Well, I don't know about that. And then I let go of the beanbag, and sure enough, it falls to the ground. And then I get all theatrical. I'm like, whoa! And I'm like, boy, do I have egg on my face. I really play it up. And that's when somebody finally breaks attention and just laughs because I'm obviously being ridiculous. I'm acting like a total buffoon. And then I say to them, none of you had any doubt about what would happen when I let go of that beanbag. Because we all know, we all have the knowledge that gravity makes objects fall to the ground. This is a fact. This is something we know. And if I stood up there and said, when I let go of this beanbag, it's going to fall to the ground, nobody is going to be moved by that one way or another. They'd probably just think that I'm crazy, because why would somebody make a big deal out of a beanbag falling to the ground? But then I say, what if I stood up here? And instead of talking about a beanbag, what if I stood here? You came here to learn about an effective communication practice, which is, of course, what the workshop is about. And instead, I started preaching on the virtues of Catholicism, or touting the virtues of Christianity as a whole. And I said, Jesus is the only path to salvation. Or what if I started quoting the Quran and said that Allah is the only way and that we must all convert to Islam? Or what if I started touting philosophies of pagan tradition and said that everyone has to convert to paganism. Can you imagine the tension that would be in that room if I stood up there and started preaching religion? Not only would it be out of context, but there would be that heaviness that, oh my God, he's talking about religion. I didn't come here to be preached to. I have my own religious practice. It is what it is, and I don't want anyone telling me what I should be doing. But that heaviness is really a reflection of an emotional charge that won't come up if we say, when I drop this beanbag, when I let go of this beanbag, it's going to fall to the ground. The emotional charge doesn't happen when I say that, but if I said these other things about religion, just think about how heavy with emotional charge the room would become. And the reason why is because these three religions, and any other religion I would talk about, are all founded upon a belief, a sense of faith in something taking place that hasn't, something that hasn't been validated in the physical world. The idea of a deity, the possibility of a deity, for many people is not actually a possibility at all. For them, it's very real, and they converse with and communicate with this deity on a regular basis. But there's no physical evidence of it in the world around us. There's physical evidence of gravity, like when you let go of a beanbag. But there's no physical evidence of the things that we believe in relation to religion. So really, what a belief winds up being, I have this belief, I believe in this. It winds up being certainty without tangibility. Certainty without tangibility. That's the difference between the lightness and humor of dropping a beanbag in front of a bunch of people and talking about religion. Is one is certain in the physical world and the other one is not. What if we could take that emotionally charged situation and guide our audience to feel empowered as a result? That's what we're talking about here. We are talking about taking that heaviness and flipping it on its end and filling up our audience with a sense of possibility, filling them up with a sense of empowerment. That's what we're here to do. That's why this particular training is so important, because we want to take all of that emotion and infuse our entire talk with it. So to illustrate how this works, what I'd like to do is refer to the story of the little engine that could. Now we all know this story, right? The train breaks down on one side of the mountain. And they're like, oh no, how are we going to get these toys and candy to the little girls and boys on the other side of the mountain? And so a sleek, shiny engine comes by. And they say, will you take this train over the mountain? And he's like, no, I'm too busy. And then a rusty old engine comes by. And they're like, will you take this over the mountain? And he's like, no, I'm too tired. And then the little engine comes by. They ask, will you take this over the mountain? And she's like, sure. So she hooks up, and then she very famously says, I think I can. I think I can. I think I can. I think I can. And then, of course, she makes it over the mountain. What this story illustrates is a character who is empowered. She was empowered to go over the mountain with the train, whereas the other two trains were not. But let me ask you, does the little engine have more knowledge than the other two? Does she know more? Does she have more information than the other two engines? Is that the differentiating factor between why she was empowered and they were not? No, that is not why she hooked up and went over the mountain. She hooked up, said, I think I can, and went over the mountain because of what she believed. She was empowered because she believed she had the time and the energy to make it over. And therefore, she was the only one who did. So originally, at the beginning of this training, I said information is not the thing that empowers people. And then after that, what I said was the real emotional weight of our communication is not driven by that which we know. It's that which we believe. And so, what this all means is that people are empowered, not by that which they know is true, not by knowledge, not by information, but rather that which they believe is possible. Your job when you get up on that stage is not to provide people with information. It's to empower your audience to believe that change is possible for them. And that is why they will hoard you after the talk, because you have empowered them to believe in a different possibility. That is the thing that ultimately gets people excited by the end of a talk. Okay? Does that make sense? Do you see where everybody else goes wrong? By just providing all of their components, all their steps, all their tips, their framework. Now, this training will have a framework, absolutely. But it's not only going to have a framework. It has the very sentence you have in front of you. And this sentence right in front of you is an example of what this entire training is about. It's a core belief. That's what this is. And this core belief winds up being the silver bullet, not only to your keynote or to your talk or whatever it is you do up on that stage, but everything you communicate to everyone about your work in all contexts. Whether it's a 1-minute elevator speech, a 60-minute keynote, or a 5-day training. Whatever it is, this core belief winds up being the foundation of all of your other communication. But it also winds up being the secret sauce that will empower your audience to make meaningful and positive change in their life. So to illustrate a core belief in another context, let's look at the ancient text known as The Art of War. So The Art of War is like a treatise written by Sun Tzu in ancient China on how to win at war. And he starts exploring in the very early part of the first chapter. He starts laying out a bunch of content. The art of war is governed by 5 constant factors to be taken into account in one's deliberations when seeking to determine the conditions obtaining in the field. And he names 5 of them, right? These wind up being components. Remember, I was just down on frameworks just now? This is an example of a framework that Sun Tzu wants to provide to his reader. But then he goes a little further, and then he asks all of these different questions. Here's yet another framework. And you can be like, Neil, are you saying that The Art of War is a bad example of content? Because that thing's been around for thousands of years, and it's quoted all the time. Yes, it is quoted all the time. That is absolutely true. However, these are not the kinds of things that are quoted when you hear about The Art of War. What you hear about is this sentence right here. All of warfare is deception. This sentence shows up in the 3rd season of West Wing. It shows up in the movie Wall Street with Michael Douglas and Charlie Sheen. Actually, that has Martin Sheen in it too. So I guess Martin Sheen just has an affinity for projects that talk about warfare. So there you go. What this sentence is not just a framework that requires a bunch of questions or a bunch of components or whatever. What this is a distillation of the entire book into a single sentence. He says all of warfare is deception. If you want to win at your war, you have to deceive your opponent. And then he outlines different examples like feign disorder, like make it look like everyone's going crazy and has no idea what they're doing, and then crush your opponent. You basically give them a false sense of confidence by deceiving them. And then you can win. So let's take a look at this. This sentence, I'm basically making the point that this sentence is what every thought leader needs if they're trying to get a message out into the world, if they're trying to get their idea out into the world and truly empower their audience. But why would that happen? Imagine in the old days when you had armies show up in a field with their infantry and their cavalry, and their job is just to march on each other and attack. Well, let's say there are 2 armies meeting in a big field, and there's really thick forests all around them, and one army is way smaller than the other one, and the colonel's like, I have no idea what I'm going to do with this. This is awful. We're outnumbered 3-1. And some upstart lieutenant falls out of rank and says, Colonel, sir, all of warfare is deception. And the colonel says, you're out of rank. You've fallen out of rank, lieutenant. Go back. And of course, the lieutenant runs back. And after mumbling to himself about that insubordination, the colonel then thinks about something. He's like, wait a minute, all of warfare is deception. I could take my cavalry and have them hide in the trees and come up from behind as our infantry is approaching on them. And we can get them from both angles. This would be an idea of how to deceive the opponent. And yet all the lieutenant said was all of warfare is deception. This is because a core belief is as powerful as it is because it empowers others without any other context. That lieutenant said one sentence, and suddenly the colonel had an idea because of that sentence. That winds up being why this is such a potent asset. This colonel, daunted by his problem, suddenly had a solution after somebody else said one sentence to him. So essentially, a core belief is why you solve what you solve in the way that you solve it, which really makes it sort of like your secret sauce. So all of warfare's deception was Sun Tzu's secret sauce. This is how you win a war. This is the key. Core beliefs show up in the absolute best-selling work around. Benjamin Spock was the very famous author of the Common Sense Baby and Child Care books that sold like 50 million copies in the 20th century, and it's said to be the second best-selling book in America in the 20th century after the Bible. And I'm paraphrasing here, but on the first page, he says something along the lines of the natural loving care you give your child is more important than doing any one thing perfectly. This is Dr. Spock's secret sauce. Timothy Ferriss, author of the 4-Hour Work Week. Again, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but what he essentially says is the most powerful life you can live is one in which you control your time and location. That is how you live a powerful life. You control the amount of time that you spend on any given thing and the location in which you do it. And then Louise Hay, the very famous author of You Can Heal Your Life and the founder of Hay House, said the most fundamental way to affect positive change in the body is to change the way we think. These are all examples of secret sauces, and big surprise, all of these authors have sold millions of copies of their book. Now let's look at TED Talks. Amy Cuddy, who as of this training has the second most popular TED Talk of all time. Her talk is called Your Body Language Shapes Who You Are. This is a core belief. Simon Sinek, the most popular TEDx talk of all time. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. Dan Pink, who gives one of my most favorite talks, says the secret to high performance is not rewards and punishments, but that unseen intrinsic drive to do things because they matter. This is also a core belief. My question to you is, what is the commonality here? What is the common element that pervades those 3 core beliefs on the previous slide, and then these 3 things, and art of war, and even the sentence I told you was the core belief of this training from before? What is the commonality? And that's what we're here to basically hash out for the rest of this training. The 3 components of a core belief. Let's look at all of warfare's deception again. That is just 5 words. How could there be 3 components in a 5-word sentence? Well, let's break it down. The first one is quite simply the outcome. What he's promising is that you will win at war. That's the outcome that he's promising you. So another way to word this is, if you want to win at war, right, that would be a more explicit way of presenting that outcome. This sentence, all warfare is deception, just really implies that outcome, right? The next component is an action. So let's use that paraphrase. If you want to win at war, you have to blank. That blank is, of course, deceiving your opponent. Deception is an action that you can take. So we have all of warfare, which is the implied outcome, and deception is the stated action you have to take in order to win the war. What could that third component be? Think about it for a second. What else is left in that sentence? A cause and effect relationship between the two. What a core belief is quite simply a sentence that shows that if you take a certain action, a certain outcome will be the result. Action leads to result, cause and effect. That is ultimately what we're going for, is a language that suggests causation to a desired outcome. Do you see how that works? Does that make sense? By creating a cause and effect relationship between an action and an outcome, a core belief can empower someone without any other context at all. That is ultimately what will happen. You do not need any other information, any other insights, any other content if you have a well-constructed core belief. Now, as we'll talk about through other modules in this whole program, obviously context will help, but like that lieutenant and the colonel and all of that in that scenario, you could go up to somebody and say, if you want to win at war, you need to deceive your opponent. And they could, in theory, start forming ideas. Oh, well, then how do I deceive my opponent? Because I want to win that war. So, to illustrate yet again how this empowerment exercise could happen. So, I have a very old friend who owns a dance school where children go to the school after their regular school and learn ballet and modern and jazz and hip hop and all of that. And she recently expanded the size of it a great deal because of a lot of activity, and she decided to add a cafe. And what her thought was to provide free tuition to parents who staffed the cafe. So if they worked the cafe, then they could get free classes for their kids. And she wanted to make sure that they were good customer servants. And so she prepared them with like a 45-minute seminar, workshop type thing on effective customer service. And so she told me afterwards that she introduced them to a system called AIDIT. AIDIT is a customer service framework that is used by a lot of medical staff, like nursing staff at hospitals and stuff like that. And it says AIDIT is a framework that teaches customer service and stands for acknowledge, introduce, duration, explanation, and thank you. And the idea that she taught to the people working at her cafe was to go through these 5 steps in order to resolve any sort of customer servant type problems, like an unhappy customer or something like that. And I hadn't heard of it, and then I looked it up and I read about it. And I just didn't understand what some of these things were. Take a look at it now. If someone just said these words to you and nothing else, would you really know? Would you feel empowered with all of that information? What if instead of this, someone presented you with this? Your customer satisfaction will be defined by the extent to which their needs are considered important. So if there's a problem with a customer, then your prime directive is to show them that what they want is important to you. Do you have any ideas as to how to make sure that they know that they are important and that their needs are important? Maybe you can, maybe you can't. If I was given this construct, this framework, I wouldn't have any ideas as to how to handle myself differently. But if I was given this construct, I would start thinking of my own ideas. If my friend who was teaching this thing said nothing else but this, I'd be like, oh, well, if that's the case, then what I need to do if somebody is upset is say simple things like, I understand. And if I were in that position, I would really want something else to happen. And if I couldn't accommodate if they were making certain demands, I couldn't accommodate it, I would be able to say something like, yes, I absolutely understand why you would want that. I'm not in a position to provide that to you, but here's what I can do. I can blah, 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 blah. And I'll do whatever it takes to make sure that they know that their needs are important. The reason why I took you through all of that is because both of these passages are 16 words long. The framework on the left, as well as its introduction, is the same number of words as the core belief on the right. So if you only had 45 minutes to teach people something, which one would you rather do? Would you rather spend 45 minutes trying to hammer 5 things into their head that they now have to memorize? Or would you spend 45 minutes introducing a concept like this on the right and then exploring with them different ways that you could help them to make the customer feel like their needs are important? We'll all have our own opinions on this, but my opinion is absolutely I prefer the thing on the right. If all you have is 45 minutes to train, then start with something simple and then just go from there. Now, I say that that's what I prefer, and if you're working with me on your keynote or your talk or whatever it is, I'm going to assume that you're going to do what I say. But the only hard and fast rule of communication is that there are no hard and fast rules. I am basing my entire career on the idea that you'd prefer the thing on the right than over the thing on the left. But it's ultimately going to be up to you to make that decision. However, based on the number of times I've seen how effective this work is, and how many case studies I have that indicate how powerful this work is, I'm going to hope that you're on board with me. And as such, the remainder of this training is going to be about teaching you how to actually go through the act of constructing your own core belief. So the first step is to find the outcome. There are three components of the core belief, right? And the first component that we're going to explore is how to find the outcome. Let's look at the three TED Talk core beliefs that I cited earlier. What parts of these core beliefs are the outcome? As I hope you can guess, so the highlighted parts, the parts highlighted in red are essentially the outcomes. Your body language shapes who you are. In essence, shapes who you are in a positive way. Identifying yourself in a positive way. That's what shapes who you are represents. And then people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. It's people buying into an idea. They buy. That's the outcome. And then, of course, the third one with Dan Pink's one, the secret to high performance. High performance is the outcome. If you're a manager looking to motivate your workforce, you want them to perform well, do good things for the company. So this is the part of the sentence of the core belief that we're looking to explore. So how do we do it? We can quite simply ask, what problem is your idea going to solve? And we could very simply just start brainstorming. So let's say you are the chief marketing officer of a company and your entire career is based on marketing. And you're going to be a public speaker because you have a different idea as to how to effectively market products and services than what's out there. Okay? So all of the different problems that you might solve in your world of marketing. You might be solving the problem of how to attract business. You might be solving the problem of how to build brand recognition. You might be solving the problem of how to improve your image, respond to a crisis, build issue awareness, provide public service, or even quite simply just marketing. These are all things that you could potentially talk about in your area of expertise. So the first step is just to simply write down as many different problems as your area of expertise solves. And then what do? You organize them from being general to specific. So let's look at all of these different brainstorms in a different way. Let's look at them from the most general ones, which would be marketing or attracting business. That's the broad strokes of marketing. A little bit more specific is maybe building brand recognition so that people know what your brand is and what it stands for. A little more specific than that might be improving an image, providing public service, build issue awareness. These are all even a bit more specific still. And then a super specific marketing challenge could be how to respond to a crisis. All of a sudden something happened and you have to get word out as well as you can. So what your task is to A, do a total brain dump of all the different problems that you solve. And then, once you've done that, then organize them from general to specific. So your first step is to write down all the problems solved by your work as a whole. Try to write down at least 10. You might do very specific work, but maybe there are different aspects of that work. Write down at least 10, and it's a brainstorm, so you don't have to worry about being wrong. Then, organize them from general to specific. Then, ask yourself, is this content a signature talk, or is it about a specific aspect of my work? So this training is to prepare you for a specific talk. And what you might find is that you're going to go up and give a very general talk on marketing at some big marketing conference. Then that's what your purpose is, and this is just your take on it. Or what if you're going to some sort of nonprofit type of conference and you're specifically going to give a talk on how you respond to crises? That this is sort of like your passion project under the purview of your general work as a marketing executive. And maybe that's not even what you do for your job, but it's your passion project. You have a methodology and you've consulted on that methodology many times, and that's what you're really going to make your talk about. That means that the outcome for your core belief, at least for this talk, would presumably be how to respond to a crisis. All right, and that's the problem that you might solve. So that's your first step, is in finding the outcome for this particular talk. The next step, of course, is to find the action. So remember, the all of warfare is deception. Deception is the action in Sun Tzu's core belief. Usually, what we do in our talks is have 10 tips or 7 steps. The conference I went to was like the main celebrity best-selling author guy had 6 or 7 components to being successful, right? And this is what we do. What we're going to do is distill everything down to one action. Why? Because people are most likely to integrate an idea when they can act on its most basic element. That was the whole idea behind the AIDIT reframe. The whole idea behind the AIDIT reframe is to get them to act not to act on 5 different things, memorize 5 different things, but to act on a single thing. So let's look at those 3 TED examples. Where is the action in your body language shapes who you are? People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And the secret to high performance is not rewards and punishments, but that unseen intrinsic drive to do things because they matter. Where is the action? So now we'll highlight in red once again your body language, as in changing your body language. That's the essential action here. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. You need to explain why. That's the action. And then the unseen intrinsic drive to do things because they matter. Get people to do something because it matters. That's the action. Okay? So to get to the action, you can ask yourself, what is the flaw in how your audience solves this problem? One of the most critical aspects of this particular work is that your work needs to disrupt the way other people solve a problem. Otherwise, it's just going to be massively difficult to engineer an effective core belief. So, in theory, you're disrupting the status quo in one of a couple of ways. One way is the problem with how your audience usually solves the problem. Or if they're missing a solution at all, then they don't have any solution at all. So what your job is to basically fill in the blanks of this sentence. The problem with how companies usually market to their audience is that they talk about their product or service. Let's say, as a marketing expert, you're trying to get everyone else around you to stop talking about their product or service in their marketing content. That is not the key to effective marketing. That this is the flaw. You talk about your product or service, and that's what in theory people are supposed to be drawn to. And frankly, I see this all the time. So a marketing expert who comes out and says there's a better way is going to absolutely have my attention. And another way you can look at the action isn't in relation to what your audience does or doesn't do, and the flaws in what your audience does and doesn't do. It's what about the flaw in how your competition solves a problem? What if the way you're disrupting the status quo is in how you are setting yourself apart from the rest of the pack? The problem with how your competitors solve the problem is that they do something that isn't going to get the outcome. So let's look at this in relation to brand recognition. The problem with how other marketers build their clients' brands is that they try to entertain the marketplace. This happens to be my pet peeve. I've seen all these commercials on TV where the whole purpose of the commercial is just to make the audience laugh. But that laughter has nothing to do with the product or service being advertised. So I believe, with the exception of Geico, which is random on purpose and is tremendously effective in my opinion as a result of that, but everyone else makes no connection between what happens in the commercial, like something funny or something poignant or whatever, and their product or service, their brand. So you might be a marketing expert and you're going to get up on stage and talk about how we need to stop trying to simply entertain our audience. We need to actually turn them into customers or clients. Then, once you've filled in those 2 sentences, then you need to answer another question. What should be done instead? But the real way to achieve outcome is to action. You want them to do this, but the real way to market a product or service is to promise an outcome. And this is a very famous thing in effective marketing and effective sales, is that you don't sell the drill bit, you sell the hole. You don't sell the plane, you sell the destination. Right? So this isn't anything new, but it is a good example of disrupting the way people typically solve a problem. And so with the brand recognition, but the real way to build a brand is to use the brand as the vehicle for resolving tension. The steps that you're to take now are to write down at least 5 versions of the end user version. Then write down at least 5 versions of the competition version. And maybe you know that you only want to focus on one but not the other. Then write 10 of that one. But the point is to write down 10 versions of those sentence stems. Okay? And then ask yourself, is this about disrupting the competition or the end user? Are you going to get up on that stage and bust the myths of how other people solve the problem in your industry? Or are you there to say to the audience, the way you guys are trying to solve the problem yourselves isn't working, and here's a better way? Okay? It's a big question to ask. All right, so that's the second part. That is finding the action. The third part is creating the cause and effect. Now, this part is going to be a little more straightforward because instead of brainstorming a bunch of different abstract notions, all you need to do here is pick and choose from one of 7 templates. And each of these 7 templates are based on famous core beliefs in TED Talks and authors, and even a couple of my clients are thrown in there as well. And what I'll do is I'll just simply pose questions to you. And those questions will help you to clue yourself in to whether you should use one kind of these sentences or another. But also note, this is not a comprehensive list. There may be a different way to structure your core belief. In fact, I know that there are. But this is just to get you started. I could give you 15 different things and that'll probably overwhelm you. 7 might even be too many. But there's a lot of potential in these 7, so I'm just going to go for it and just ask you to come along for the ride. All right. So the first question, does the action disrupt typical solutions? Now that might seem, based on what we just went through, that might be the answer is yes for anyone who goes through this training, right? But that's just the point, because this first one is an association. And it's probably the most straightforward and simplest way to write a core belief. When we take an action, we achieve an outcome, or we achieve an outcome when we take an action. So examples, Liz Gilbert's TED Talk. We will foster the contribution of the creative spirit when we continually show up for our piece of the creative process. And Marco Tempest, when you give yourself over to art's deception, it becomes magic. It's very simple. When we A, we O, or we O when we A. Question 2. Do you express your outcome through a particularly wide lens? Is your outcome like some great big promise that applies to almost everyone everywhere? Okay. One of my clients created this program called Literally Healing at a children's hospital. And the core belief I helped her to create was literacy can heal. And the outcome is heal. And healing is a really big promise. It's just getting better. And that applies to everyone. This is a possibility. An action can lead to an outcome, or outcome can happen with action. And another one is Timothy Ferriss's, the most powerful life you can live. Powerful life is a very wide lens type of outcome. Does your idea challenge a general assumption made about its industry? Do most people in your industry assume one thing and you're actually going to shed some light on that and say it's actually something different? This was the case with a client of mine named Pathfinder Solutions. And she created this core belief before she ever met me. She consults with nonprofits and helps nonprofits to be more effective. The most important thing to have an impact isn't money, and it isn't political connections or anything like that. It's talent. If you attract the right talent, you're going to have a bigger impact. It's a definition. A defines O, or O will be defined by A. Is your idea the main ingredient in a larger goal? What does that mean? What essentially it means is, like, do you have this really big goal and perhaps an unexpected ingredient is going to be the key to helping you achieve that goal? This is the nature of Amy Cuddy's talk. Your body language shapes who you are. It's a declaration. A leads to O, or O is A. All of warfare's deception is a declaration. You want to win this great big war? You have a very small, simple thing that you need to do. Does your idea rely on a step-by-step process? And so, this formula just winds up being a sequential kind of thing. Like Ed Catmull is the founder of Pixar. And he has this great book called Creativity Inc. And in it, his core belief is getting the team right is the necessary precursor to getting the ideas right. It's actually a lot like talent defines impact, right? And Susan Cain gives a TED Talk on introverts. The more freedom we give introverts to be themselves, the more likely they are to come up with their own unique solutions to problems. What these have in common is that they are a process. First we do A, and then O will happen. Is the idea a direct contradiction of other people's solutions? Do most people solve it one way, and you're meant to solve it a different way? Simon Sinek says, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. What he does is a contradiction. You will achieve outcome not from competition solution, but from this action. I happen to love this format because what it does is it adds a fourth component. You have the outcome, you have the action that gets you that outcome, and a cause and effect relationship. But what you also have is the status quo. You have what conventional wisdom dictates. You will achieve outcome not from convention, but from this action instead. And of course, I provide a contradiction type core belief as well, and I did earlier in this training. People are empowered not by that which they know is true, but rather that which they believe is possible. And then the final one is, will the absence of your idea lead to catastrophe? Ken Robinson has the most famous talk as of this training, the most famous TED talk, and he says our only hope for the future is to see our creative capacities for the richness they are. Our only hope for the future. He's issuing an ultimatum. A is the only way O will happen, or O will only happen if A. So the steps I recommend are to write down your favorite 3 outcomes from the first exercise at the top of the paper. You've written down 10, now pick 3. Now write down your favorite 3 actions below the outcomes. So you wrote 10 action fill in the blanks, now pick your 3 favorite ones. Now mix and match them into your favorite cause and effect format. So what you do is you pick the 3 and then pick a few of the different, if you happen to like one of the 7 models for the core belief and you just know that that's one that resonates the most with you, then work with that one in the mix and match thing. But maybe you try a couple of your favorite ones or something like that. What I've attached to this training is like a worksheet where you can fill in the blanks yourself. And I've provided an example for you on how that looks. Remember, the only hard and fast rule of communication is that there are no hard and fast rules. This is one process you could use to get to your core belief. But maybe you're just in the shower tomorrow and suddenly your core belief occurs to you. And maybe you even have a language for it that I haven't included in this training, and that would be amazing. But your next step after coming up with filling out the sheet is to send it to me, and then we have our consult. So the good news is that you might get stuck with all of this, and then we just work it out. But you still need to send me the sheet before we set up the consult. So that's your next step. So download the worksheet, fill it out, and then get in touch, and we will set up our time together. And I look forward to hearing what you come up with. Sound good? Great. Well, I look forward to taking next steps with you.